In this box, we have a Leggari stone kit. We're about to show you step by step how you can take this and transform your countertops just like these. I'm Tyler with Leggari Products. We have the easiest countertop kits on the market to install. If your countertops are outdated, don't replace them, resurface them. So the next step is to tape our edges. Our primer's dry, it's still tacky. It's obviously not completely dry. We can still tape on it while it's tacky. It's not gonna pull off. It's gonna wind up drying underneath the tape while we're doing the actual Leggari stone kit. So it's a cool product. I don't recommend doing that if you're doing paint, primer and paint. It's gonna peel that stuff right out. But if you're using our WB primer, stuff's amazing and you can tape on it when it's tacky. So what we're gonna do, tape on the counter edge, and we're gonna leave enough tape up top, about half. So we'll do half onto the edge and the other half will be above the counter. And I'm using 1.88 inch painter's tape. Works the best. It's gonna get us the best seal so we don't get any bleed marks. So I like to pull the tape out and then I'll twist it and I can kind of guide it. I can kind of guide it wherever I need it by doing that. Get it where I want it and then kind of just seal it up. All right, now we want to run another row of tape to give this a little bit more rigidity to it. Try to keep it at the same height or close to. All right, so we got our 2 rows done. Now we're just gonna press that in really, really good. Create a nice tight seal. We don't wanna have any leaks, any blowouts. And what I mean by a blowout is your tape not bonding well and the resin running under there and coming out of the bottom of the tape, and you're just wasting product. Your design on the top's gonna get messed up because it's kind of pulling away from your design to go over the edge. So again, if you're using our primers, you can tape on it within a half an hour to an hour once it's kind of set up and tacky. If you guys are using like a paint and primer, you're probably gonna wanna let that sit for 24 hours before you actually tape onto it. So what I'm doing here is just creasing these corners in. It pulls a little bit on these long spots and creates a little bit more tension. Okay, so island's done. I'll move on to the rest of the counters. Pretty simple process, just 2 layers of tape, press it down really good, and then we'll be ready to do our Leggari stone kit.
While Tyler is finishing up on taping the counter, I'm going to show you how to mix up the Leggari stone kit. So this stone kit has 4 midnight pearls, 1 adamantium, and 1 bronzer, and then of course our 3-gallon kit of our famous Leggari metallic epoxy. The first thing we want to do is empty out the part A's into a 5-gallon bucket. What we'll do is we'll put a stir stick across the top of that just to make it go a little bit quicker. I can get both of them going. And we're going to let these drip out for a few minutes. And what we're waiting for is for all the sides to clear, and we want this stream of epoxy coming out of these containers to turn into more of a drip. That's when we know that most of the epoxy off the sides of it are done running. These are very easy containers to use. One of the downsides is that there's so much surface area, it takes a little bit to get out of the container. And if you notice, these containers have a lip here that's actually equivalent to the top of the spout. And so if you just tilt them up about 5 to 10 seconds, let it run out of the tops, and then tip it back over. That'll ensure you don't have any epoxy stuck in the top of those containers. We're gonna be using a large paddle wheel, a small paddle wheel, and 6 2-quart containers or 2.5 quart containers. And we have a respirator mask. You want to use a respirator anytime you're dealing with metallics. Metallics have a tendency to get airborne when you're mixing them just a little bit, so we recommend actually mixing the metallics into the epoxy outside. In here, we're in a massive warehouse, but we recommend not mixing up the metallics inside where the project is at. So we have some stir sticks here. Pretty minimal process. This is pretty easy. So it's a real fine drip. You can definitely leave that upside down for quite a while so you can be sure you get everything out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add the hardener, the part B, because it's a 2-to-1 resin, so 2 parts A to 1 part B. We're going to add it in. We're going to mix it for about 1.5 minutes. I'm going to take a 5-gallon stir stick. I'm going to scrape the sides and the bottom probably once halfway through. I'll move the drill up and down, scrape the bottom and the sides with the drill. We're just going to mix it as best we can using a 5-gallon stir stick and a mixing paddle. Then we're going to separate it out into these where it'll actually get mixed a second time. So here at Leggari, we teach the philosophy that you want to mix twice. And you always want to mix in a second container. We call it a secondary mixing container. We're one of the only companies that teaches that. And we don't know why more people don't, because it'll minimize and actually get rid of completely soft spots in counters or even in floors. You always want to mix twice using a second clean container. You can never scrape the bottom and the sides enough using a stir stick, but it definitely helps the process. But don't rely on the stir stick alone. You'll never be able to get all of the Part A resin off the sides. So you must pour it into another bucket. That is vital for the process. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our 6 2-quart containers and we're gonna set them out right next to each other. I'm not gonna leave a gap because I'm just gonna pour the bucket in between them. You're gonna make a little bit of a mess. That's just part of the process. That's part of the fun of these kits. There's a little bit of a mess, like when you were a kid. So we have plastic everywhere. We're just gonna do this. You want about 56 to 63 ounces in each one. But the biggest thing I'm trying to do is just separate it evenly. Now I have a brand new stir stick because the last one I was scraping inside the resin and I know that I was hitting a lot of the Part A. I don't really want to use that again. I'm just going to use a new one, even though we will mix it again. Okay, now I'm going to switch my drill head out to a smaller one, a little more manageable in these tiny containers. I'm also going to slow the RPM down on the drill. So now what we want to do is we want to mix in our metallics. So I'm going to put the respirator on. I'm just going to pour the powder in all these containers and then mix them. And all I'm trying to do is just fully submerge the metallics and then mix it for about 10 to 15 seconds longer, scraping the sides and the bottom. You got to be careful with some of these containers because if you turn the drill on real high and it nicks the sides, some of these containers, if they're cheap, you know, which we've had some cheap containers before, it'll blow out the sides. So hopefully that doesn't happen to you. And I'm gonna wear the respirator because again, don't wanna breathe any of this stuff. The other thing I'll mention is if you mix from your lightest color to your darkest color, you don't need to wash this off or clean this off or switch drills. So I'm gonna start and I'm going to mix the adamantium in the first one, the bronzer in the second one, and then I'm gonna do the midnight pearl in the rest of them so I don't have to switch out my drill. Hey guys, my gloves got a little messy. I'm a little bit of a clean freak, so I'm changing gloves. One thing I want to talk about before I mix this up is how user-friendly our epoxy is. Right now, this resin is 66, 64, anywhere from 63 to 65 degrees, maybe 66 degrees. You don't have to heat our resin up to 80, 85 degrees. You don't have to heat it up at all. We just recommend that you acclimate it to about room temperature. It's cold in here. It's between 60 and 65 degrees in here. We don't need to heat it up. We'll have plenty of working time. You know, 70 degrees is kind of like the perfect climate to use our epoxy in. The other thing is I'm gonna use this drill and you're gonna see a lot of air go into our resin. We don't care. We're not worried about air. We're not worried about bubbles. We've formulated this resin not only have lots of working time and not have to heat up and it won't crystallize, but we've also formulated it to release bubbles when you work with it. So I am not worried about inducing air into our resin. I know that's kind of a big thing with epoxy. We've been doing this a long time and we created an epoxy specifically for these applications. So don't worry, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. Putting some gloves on. Got my gloves messy. Again, I know it's weird. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take 6 more of these 2-quart containers. You can use 2.5-quart containers again. And then we're going to make our batches for the Leggari stone kit. I'm going to start out just like a chef. I'm just making a recipe. I'm gonna put black in the bottom of 4 of them. And then what I wanna do is I wanna put this bronzer in the bottom just a little bit. I want 2 of these batches to finish off with bronzer. Now I'll take some of the adamantium, just gonna pour a little, just a ribbon through the middle of these. Now, obviously I have a lot more midnight pearl to work with than I do the rest of the colors, so we're going to alternate the colors quite a bit. I'm going to pour quite a bit of the midnight pearl in. You can get pretty wild with each of your batches, but just keep in mind you want all of your batches to have some similarities, because when you're pouring it out on the counter, you don't want every single batch to be different, because you want the counters to match everywhere. So Tyler's going to do some things to ensure that the counters match. He's going to move from counter to counter. But even if you're the person mixing, you want to be sure that every batch has at least similar colors. And even though I'm starting with with bronzer on the bottom of these, and these have Midnight Pearl, I'm gonna tell Tyler, hey, these two have bronzer in the bottom, so he knows these two batches are different than these batches. All right, now we'll get some bronzer going. All right, now I have some adamantium, Midnight Pearl, and some bronzer left. Now I want to alternate quite a bit between these colors. I'm just going to do little batches of each. And I'm going to try to have a lot of agitation happen within the container. Notice every time I pour, it sucks those colors down. So I'm kind of pouring it across the mix to try to get it to pull in and just kind of naturally mix those colors a little bit within the containers. Go back to the Midnight Pearl. Lots of layers at this point. Definitely happy with these two batches. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna finish off most of the adamantium in these two batches. These are definitely gonna be some lighter batches. It's gonna look really cool. So these might be the batches we start or end with. All right guys, as you can see, there's plenty of working time. The area's a mess. This is great. This is gonna be a beautiful kit. We're gonna take this over to Tyler and he'll start pouring it out.
All right, next step is to pour out the stuff out of the bucket and create something beautiful. So Tim's got all the stuff made up. We want to get those out as soon as we can. We don't want to just let those sit. But I'm going to show you an easy way to kind of map out a design if you're going to follow design. I'm not going to do a design on this. I'm going to show you another technique, kind of getting some wider beads. And then when I get low on the buckets, I'll kind of pour out some more accurate veining. But just take a Sharpie and you can just start kind of mapping out a pattern that you want to follow on your counter. You can also map it out on a piece of paper and really get the design that you're looking for. And then that'll give you a guide to follow as you're pouring out of the buckets. So we've done that in a lot of other videos. So what I'm gonna do starting out, since the buckets are pretty full, and when you're pouring out of a full bucket, you get some wider beads. I'm gonna pour onto a piece of cardboard and kind of just let it kind of go onto the counter off the cardboard. And we will start with the ones that Tim didn't put the bronzer in the beginning. So this has got the black in it first, and then the bronzer and the silver mixed throughout. So we'll start here. I'm gonna just pour some of this out on the cardboard here. Start on an edge and just let that start going out on the counter. We're just gonna kind of do this randomly, start getting the product out on the counter, and then we'll kind of fine tune some of the designs. Notice I'm trying to keep this over the top so I'm not dripping all over the floor. And this will be a little bit more of a subtle design. So I'll completely finish this cup on the island, and then I'll do one of the same cups on the rest of the counters. And since I got to get by the edge, I'll pour it in almost like a line. And I'll be able to get close to just that edge. You can see it's already looking just absolutely gorgeous. All right, so there's one bucket. I'll kind of scrape these edges off just so this isn't dripping everywhere I go. I'll grab another bucket and we'll go to these other counters and just do the same thing. Now notice I kind of went in a pattern all the way down, so we can either keep that going on these other counters, or we could go the opposite way. Most granites usually cut out and they'll put it right. They'll have an island there. Maybe the pattern's going one way and then it's going a different direction, but it's still the same design. So we're gonna go opposite. It'll look really cool. And it's gonna be easier as well because I'll have longer areas that I can pour it out on. Do a little line, try to get majority of this on the edge. So we did 2 start pours over here. I'll get a couple on this side, just because that's where the majority comes out right when it first starts to come off the board. All right, now we got another one. I'm saving the 2 with the bronzer in the bottom for last, and I still have another one with the black. So we'll get the majority of the counter coated with these, and then we'll start adding those last 2. Okay, clean this off every time I'm moving around. That way I'm not really dripping it everywhere. We'll come back out here, do a few more. And you guys can already see the design. It's just absolutely beautiful. It looks like natural stone. So we just keep layering it until we get everything covered. So I'm gonna work on this edge right now. So I'm gonna pour a line just on this side. See, I can really control where I want that. Look at that, just getting it right on that edge. And then we'll just kind of keep jumping around the counters, guys. Want to just work on that edge. Okay, so this is my last bucket that doesn't have the bronzer in the bottom. I got those 2 left. So I just want to kind of fill in any missed spots, bare spots. The island's pretty close. So we don't want to just wind up pouring too much out in one area or too much on the island. That's kind of why I'm jumping around. So these, I'm just going to finish filling in every spot that's kind of bare. Notice how I'm holding it close to the counter as well. Get a little more up here. Just pour it on that edge. So we'll come in from the front on this one. Just working on this edge here. So I'm gonna scoop the majority of this back in the bucket, get a fresh piece of cardboard. All right, so I have a little left in that bucket. I'm gonna do a smaller piece of cardboard and really fine tune where I'm pouring it out just to fill in any of those missed spots. You'll have a little bit more control. So I'm just trying to fill in some of these spots. Again, guys, I got 2 more buckets still, but I wanna get the majority of it filled in with these darker ones. So just pour kind of a straighter line on the cardboard and we'll be able to get any tighter areas. Now we are creating a lot of bubbles by layering it like this over epoxy. You see how they just keep popping? We're basically trapping that air inside all these mist spots, which is it's totally okay. All right, so now we're gonna use the 2 that had the bronzer put in the bottom. Probably starting out, they're gonna be darker, but once I get to that real bronze color, I wanna make sure I'm getting that all over the counter. So I don't wanna just focus on one spot. We wanna be moving around. And I'm just hitting any spots that look like they're thin. And notice how I keep going with the kind of design that I have. Clean this off before I move around just to minimize those drips on the plastic. So we're gonna be getting to that bronzer soon, so I wanna make sure I get some of these dark colors everywhere. There's that bronzer. So now we want to make sure we get some of these all throughout the counter. I want to kind of go around real quick, make sure I got some of that bronzer in all the tops, which we really do. So since that's basically my last bucket had the bronzer on the bottom, it's basically going to be the same, where in the beginning it's dark, and then towards the end it starts bringing out that silver and that bronze color. So I just want to keep that in mind as I'm pouring this out, finishing out all the rest of the tops. All right, so I'm gonna finish it off with a smaller piece, and anywhere that I can see primer, I'm gonna just start hitting these spots. And guys, if you want to tone down a color, you can obviously, when you're pouring out darker colors, we can just go right over that and kind of get rid of some of that silver there. Now that we're getting down to the bronzer, I want to hit any spots that don't really have that much of it. So maybe like this back corner could use just a little bit. So when I get low, when it starts to not really drip off the cardboard, I'm just slowing it down a little and holding it really close to the edge, or the epoxy. And then it'll start separating, create some really cool effects. Just slowing it down to get that out there. I want to get some of this color on my edges as well. And then kind of move around the counters now that I'm getting a lot of that bronzer out there. All right, so all I'm gonna do now is any spots that didn't get all the way filled, we're just gonna pat them in a little. That's gonna help fill them in. But the majority of this got filled. And then what I'm gonna do to get rid of these bubbles, because we've been layering it so much and trapping air in between each layer, and the resin's starting to get a little stickier. So we're gonna just mist this surface with denatured alcohol, and it's gonna pop all these bubbles. So I wanna make sure everything's filled in before I do that. Any of the edges, any of these back edges, just anywhere that's not completely filled. All right, so I'm just taking denatured alcohol, I'm gonna mist the surface, and you'll see these start to pop. No torching required. And notice how it's not really creating the effects like the isopropyl does. So if you want to keep that kind of more of a subtle look, just use denatured alcohol. It's not going to affect the resin at all. It's just going to evaporate off the top. See, it just immediately pops those bubbles. And the reason those weren't self-popping is because the resin's setting up, it's getting thicker. We've layered it multiple times. So it's a different technique than the resin was designed for, but still amazing product, does exactly what we want it to do, and we still don't have to torch it. So guys, whenever you're spraying chemicals and stuff, always wear a mask if you're not in a well-ventilated area. We're in a massive warehouse, so we don't really, it's not confined to an area. But yeah, always wear a mask when you guys are spraying this stuff, and it's obviously flammable. Never spray your countertops and then go to torch it or do anything like that, because you run the risk of it catching on fire on the surface, and it's not good. So just keep that in mind. But look how glass smooth this lays out, and if you look at the surface, it's just fizzling. All the air in the resin is just popping all on its own. No torch, nothing. All right, tops are done, bubbles are self-popping. So last thing is I'm gonna talk about how or when you're gonna know when the right time to pull tape is. So if I lean the tape back, this is the easiest way to tell. If I lean that back, see how it's moving really, really quick? We're gonna wind up losing a lot of our design that's on the top. We wanna keep this, have it look just like it is. And to do that, we gotta let this resin set up a little. And when I come back out in maybe 40 minutes to an hour, it can take up to 2 hours depending on the temperatures you're applying it at. But the easiest way is just keep checking that tape. When that resin starts to barely move down the tape really, really slow, you wanna pull it. Just keep in mind, if you're doing thicker edges, you're gonna wanna pull that a little bit sooner so it can flow better. But if you're doing, 1.5 to 2 inch edges, about like we have here, I'll show you what we're looking for when we go to pull that. All right guys, so it's time to pull the tape. I'm gonna show you what you're looking for when it's ready to be pulled. So we'll go to the same spot, and when I bend that down, see how it's slowly moving? It's pretty thick here too, so I'll just kind of show you. So it's gonna move a little faster where it's really thick. Let's come over here, maybe like right here. See, it's just barely moving. And again, so we're okay to pull it there. If you guys are worried or you think maybe you don't want to wait, you don't want to risk it, you can always pull it a little bit earlier. So just keep in mind, you want to get it to where that resin's just barely moving down the tape edge. That's about the time you want to pull it. If it's moving really quick and fast, you're going to want to wait. But we've done so many tops on these counters that it kind of tapers off on the edges, so they kind of build up on the edges. That's why it's so thick here. So I just rip in the tape in the spot, and then I'm just going to start pulling it. You'll see when we get back to that area, it'll probably be halfway down or more to the edge, the bottom edge. All right, so you can see it's already running down almost to the bottom. Won't take long, so we're gonna just continue pulling the tape off. You guys, notice how it's not ripping our primer off, and we went over an epoxy surface, a previous counter we coated, didn't sand it or anything. That's how amazing these primers stick to smooth surfaces. A little thick there, and you'll have some spots just because we're not spreading it out or moving it around at all that are a little thicker, a little thinner, and that's to be expected when you're doing our Leggari stone kits. Okay, so the next step, once we get all our tape pulled, and you can see it's getting down to the bottom there, we're gonna help it by just brushing in any of the mist spots that is creating surface tension. We're just gonna run our hand and just get resin in those spots. That's gonna let that flow over evenly and create a really nice design on our edges. And I'm only worried about hitting the spots that need it. I don't need to hit the whole edge. There's no point in that. And don't worry about messing up the design. It's still gonna flow over for the next probably half an hour, 45 minutes. So we're just basically slicking off these surfaces with epoxy anywhere there's bare primer. I'll actually let this spot drip a little more to get to the bottom and go work on another area. So the last thing you're gonna wanna do is just scrape our drip edges. It's still a little too fluid now. It's gonna drip again, but that's okay. I'm just gonna show you what to do. When it's kinda dripping quickly like this, we can use just a paint stick. Once it sets up a little more than this, we wanna switch to something that's really skinny, flat, like a putty knife, and we just kinda scrape and cut that off, because what'll happen is, you'll probably be able to see it. I'll do it on this edge. It'll start to build up on the paint stick. When it gets sticky, see how it's leaving some behind on that edge? That's what we don't want. So if we run a metal blade across it instead, it helps eliminate that. Almost like cuts it off. And then just clean it off and just kind of go around the counter, scraping these drips off. So that's pretty much it, guys. Just watch your edges, scrape those drips off, and it'll set up enough to where it doesn't drip anymore. If you wind up missing some or you have to take off and you do get drips, 80 grit sandpaper, palm sander, sand it off, clean the counters, and then apply your top coat. But pretty simple process, so there you have it. Before we show you how these countertops turned out, we want to thank you guys for watching. If you like this video and want to have easy access to viewing hundreds of other tutorial videos, simply subscribe by clicking the red button below.